Let's go, Janne. Welcome, everyone, and welcome those of you watching afterwards. Janne, we're visiting 5 different time zones from the stage today, which is the way you usually have it.
Yeah.
What's key when managing a business that's open 24/7?
Managing it, I think, is very much actually in many aspects the same as with anything else. You need to be present, you need to communicate, you need to understand all the aspects and all the cultures. But naturally, with the time zones also comes practical things, like if you want to have a video conference with your employees, you need to have that at least twice. And even though you have it twice, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, Swedish time.
So you work double hours?
Well, that is what it very often feels like, but it's also very joyful to have people from so many different cultures and so many different backgrounds in the organization. And essentially, I think that is what we also can bring to Swedish companies, that we not only understand how a Swedish company is run, but we also understand the local markets and the culture of the local people and stakeholders and others that we need to engage with.
And you'll get a taste of what working with Business Sweden is like today. What's the key message from the stage today?
The key message today is that the world is increasingly difficult to read and to understand. The geopolitical, especially for a country that has been neutral for 200 years, all of a sudden we're on the way into NATO, and business is interlinked in a way that we haven't seen for many decades with political decisions. So the boards and the management of all companies need to kind of keep a lot of balls in the air at the same time. And we hope that we can sort that out a little bit and both make it easier to understand the pros and cons, the challenges and opportunities, but also mitigate a lot of those risks that company takes when they enter into a new market. If we can be there with our experience, but we can also be there with practical tips and tricks on how to actually do business in different markets. So now, by following the sun from Asia, where it's in zenith right now, over to America later on tonight, Swedish time, we kind of follow the sun across a few of the really, really important markets, I think, for the future of Swedish business.
So follow us during the day. Thank you, Janne.
Thank you.
We'll start by connecting to China, and I will present our panel. I say welcome to Mats Harborn from Scania Group and Joachim Abelin, who is working with Business Sweden, for Business Sweden. And we're also really happy to have on stage Nathan Sheets, Global Chief Economist from Citigroup, and Håkan Jevrell, State Secretary to Minister for International Development, Cooperation and Foreign Trade. I think we're like this, Nathan and Håkan. We will also see Joachim and Mats. What a great panel. Welcome, everyone. Can I start with you, Mats? You've been involved in establishing Scania's new production facilities in China, where you will build the next generation of electric vehicles and biofuel engines. Tell us why this investment is so important for you.
Well, it's the size of the market, simply. China makes up normally 40% of global truck sales. It's the largest transport market in the world. At the same time, it's a market that now is maturing and is going towards sustainability and efficiency. And it's being strengthened by new standards that are being strictly enforced. So we think the market's moving in our direction.
And who is enforcing these standards?
The government, because it wants to raise the level of the whole industry, and it also wants to create a more sustainable business environment.
Tell us, you've been based in China for over 30 years. How has customer demand changed in terms of demand for sustainable solutions?
Well, the interesting thing is that both you have the government now aiming for the 2 carbon goals, peak carbon 2030 and carbon neutrality 2060. But we also now see a new generation of customers. The fathers and mothers started the companies. Now the young generation who received education abroad are coming home and take over the companies. And they want to run it in a different way, in a more efficient, sustainable and professional way. This is really interesting.
Joachim, you know a lot about Scania's investment. Is it typical for a direct investment in China?
Yeah, I don't know as much as Mats, obviously, but absolutely, I think as Mats is also alluding to, for many Swedish companies, not only for Scania, China is such a big market. It's not unnatural to have 10 to 20% of your global sales, your global turnover in China, meaning that, and what we're seeing now is a global trend that production and sourcing, for that sake, is moving closer to the end customer, to the market. We often talk about nearshoring, and this is also a way of nearshoring, is actually moving production to, for example, to China, to cover China and nearby countries in the area. And there's many factors that are driving that. Sustainability considerations is one of them, but of course the logistical challenges during the pandemic created a little bit of acceleration. We're seeing certain protectionist policies in some countries, including in China, that is driving more for domestic production. But then I think more important than anything, it is that local competition is getting better much faster now. And that's why many Western and Swedish companies need to move in to be closer to customers, to be more cost effective. So just seeing over the last couple of months, there's been a number of Swedish companies besides Scania that have announced new production facilities in China. So you can definitely say that it's not unique for Scania.
Sustainability in China, Håkan, why is this no longer an impossible equation?
Well, first, I think it's very important for us to take note that business with China is not uncomplicated, and there is a political history with this that actually continues very much so. It is extremely clear that there is a path for sustainability within the Chinese government to move forward with this, and of course it's not only taking care of the Chinese market. There is a will and an understanding to see that China can play a role being a leader within sustainability in the world on a global scale, and we see that by, for instance, the acquirement of windmill farms in Europe and in Sweden. So think
moving out for an externalist perspective.
I think it's about business. It's about how to become an important player, and it's just a reality. The world is asking for the green transition, and China have put themselves in a very strong position of being part of that. However, there are of course issues in this, and we discuss this when we discuss critical raw materials and the sourcing, the sustainability processes within different production plants among the sub-suppliers. So there's a long journey ahead, and I do believe that we should be able to be part of this transition in China. But we should also be very much aware of which kind of technology we provide to the Chinese market, because, and I would assume that both our friends here present in China now, very well aware that if you hook up with the wrong partner, or if you just put a certain very, very interesting technology in China, it's very, very difficult to fully protect it.
Nathan, we're very much seeing a new global environment, and from a geopolitical point of view, what are important changes in the global economy that affect foreign companies investing in China?
My feeling is that probably the major change geopolitically is the ongoing tension between the United States and the Chinese government, and tensions between the West and the Chinese government more broadly. I was at the U.S. Treasury as Undersecretary from 2014 to 2017. And during that period, I spent a lot of time, I traveled to China 14 times over a 2.5-year period. And the premise with which the United States at that point was addressing China was as a goal to have them be a responsible stakeholder in the global system and to increase their engagement. And I can tell you over the last 6 or 7 years, that has changed dramatically. First tariffs and increasingly a whole range of sanctions that are limiting the kinds, specifically the kinds of technologies that the West is able to export into China. And so I think the reality of this increasingly fraught geopolitical relationship is a constraint on some of the progress that some of the other speakers have described. Now, if there is a caveat on that, I think maybe the place where there is still hope for some constructive interaction between particularly the United States and China is on some of these sustainability issues, where there is a recognition that if the world is going to do it, it's got to require the United States and China, amongst others in Europe and elsewhere, cooperating, but it requires the US-China relationship, at least to that extent, to be functional.
Companies like long-term planning, what would you say is most difficult to predict in the economic landscape that you're working with?
I think we're in a world where we increasingly understand many of the dynamics associated with supply and demand. But supply and demand are now being affected by a whole range of additional factors. And we've talked already a little bit about the evolving geopolitical landscape. We've seen pandemics intercede, some of the implications of this new climate environment and the challenges that we're facing with climate change. Cyber issues are all front and center. So it really feels to me like there are a whole long list of developments that really do make doing business and specifically forecasting where this thing is likely to head very difficult. A famous American philosopher once said, forecasting is very difficult, especially when it's about the future. And if that were true 20 or 30 or 50 years ago, it's especially true now.
Joachim, can I ask you, how are Chinese companies who have a global strategy looking for partners to solve important regional climate and energy challenges? And can you give us some examples of those kind of partnerships?
Absolutely. I mean, as several of the other panelists have also pointed out, there's a clear climate goal in China, and Mats mentioned the 2060 ambition to be neutral and peak in 2030, which is now trickling down from national level to provincial, local levels. And that's, of course, converting into business decisions. Companies need to find more climate-friendly solutions. Definitely an area where there's a strong appetite for Swedish climate technology and sustainable solutions. We can see this Business Sweden, together with the wider Team Sweden and Swedish Institute, is running a large program called Pioneer the Possible, which is all about taking Swedish solutions within green energy, green mobility, circularity, supply chain, etc., bringing it to Chinese market and many other markets around in Asia, for that sake. And we see a clear appetite from Chinese companies to collaborate. Not only about taking Swedish solutions, there are also solutions out there in the market that are interesting for us to understand. So see, just like the previous speakers have pointed out, this is definitely a good area for collaboration, and this is where we're seeing the largest appetite. On the other hand, we should say that in our most recent business climate survey that we do together with the Chamber of Commerce, Embassy and Consulates, we also saw that the influence of environmental aspects in Chinese companies' purchasing decisions is still considered to be pretty low. But I think this is something that will accelerate pretty fast, especially after the economy gets a bit, hopefully, more stabilized for here. I think the focus on the 2030 targets that are right around the corner will become pretty high again.
Joachim, how does the government incentivize?
There's definitely incentives from the government, especially down to a more local and provincial level. And we've seen several examples of where there's something, for example, called green factory certificates. So if you fulfill certain requirements on green energy, energy efficiency, waste handling, etc., you get a certificate, And then you're also subject both to bonuses and subsidies, but you can also get a more preferential treatment. We saw that, for example, during the power outages 2 years back in China, where several factories were suddenly shut down, electricity was turned off overnight. The ones that had these certificates, they could still operate. So there's a clear incentive to get greener and get pretty fast. And I think we will see more of that moving forward.
How should we, so to speak, address the public nervousness about China, Nathan?
Oh boy, that is a very tough question. And let me say, speaking very, very candidly, that in the United States, I don't think that we're doing a good job of this at all. But I think that ultimately the answer is a recognition that if the United States and China can work together, and if the globe and China can work together rather than at cross purposes, China's rise can be a win-win proposition for China, for the United States, and for Europe, for the rest of the world. That China coming online means more demand. And actually, one of the things I've heard this morning that is really quite striking, 5 or 10 years ago, if we had discussions of China, it would have been primarily as an export platform, a great place to produce and then sell from. And I think our colleagues this morning have emphasized China as a consumer and as a final market. And that is an example of what I have in mind, that this can be a win-win proposition if the various sides of the debate are able to come together and work constructively. So there's great upside potential with the integration of China. It's our challenge to reap it. But right now it kind of feels to me like maybe things are moving sideways at best, and in some areas maybe even backwards.
Mats, how is Scania tackling this new geopolitical situation, and is de-risking a strategic option for you?
Well, the word de-risking is in a way a strange word, because business is always about risk and reward. Managing risk is part of our daily operation. We have to manage internal and external deviations or disturbances. I think actually the biggest risk for us would be to not be part of the China market and to keep pace with what's happening. China is not only a place to produce or to sell to, it's also a market where new technologies relevant to our industry and other industries are being developed at a very fast pace. So we now need to integrate into the Chinese innovative ecosystems. I'm thinking about electrification, autonomous driving, intelligent and connected vehicles. This is perhaps the biggest risk if we are not part of that, because that technological development is happening extremely fast.
Håkan, what is the government doing to ease the trade with China despite these changing conditions?
Well, I think we're trying to navigate in a very, very difficult landscape. And of course, we're part of the European Union, and it's clear that the European Union is the most important platform for Sweden when we talk about foreign trade. There was a negotiated agreement, and it was put on hold for some reasons, one of them having Swedish individuals on the sanctions list, for instance. So there are tricky things. However, you know, when we talk about de-risking and not decoupling, and that is also one thing that is a little bit tricky. In parts, decoupling is already there. Maybe not from our side, but actually from the Chinese side. With you cannot use all the technological instruments on social media and so on. But it's very clear, and I do agree that there is a great potential, and we should really try to cherish that. But also, and I think Mats is really onto something here. There is an extremely rapid technology development in China, so there is a need to be there to understand this rapid development and tap into different parts. But the geopolitical situation is as such that now after COVID, it feels like a little bit we're in a period of actually making things possible to happen again, and we should cherish that. And I must say that your facility that you're now building in China, from Scania perspective, let us now see how that really progresses, and that you can achieve your goals. Otherwise, I think that would send a signal that it would be tricky. So it's really much of the coming years to see how this develops. And for me, you know, I'm not a China expert. I have not lived in China, but it's clear that I think everybody who enters the markets must be extremely clear of what they want to achieve, what are the goals, which risks can I accept if I'm to go there. And it's also the understanding that the market might not develop as you expect. But when you do that, and when you're ready, saying, this is my technology that I'm ready to put in, let us see what happens. I think it's great potential. And then I would just like to add that sometimes it's described like it's the US and China, the big powers.
And you have to choose between the two.
And we're in between. We're not in between. We're not in between. EU and the US is part of the same value-based, rules-based world order. And in that sense, we are, of course, committed to our democratic values to stick together.
So you don't believe in a decoupling scenario?
Well, decoupling is it's a very tricky word, as de-risking is, because in parts we are already decoupled. Companies do choose what kind of technology they want to be. And there might be, and this is a risk, it might be that certain products are produced only for the Chinese market. And then you have sort of variants of those products who are sold to the rest of the world. And we saw that, you know, when our cell phones were new back in the days. You couldn't use your cell phone in the US, for instance. But then we agreed and we opened up our markets, and now it's a global standards and so on. So this will be a very interesting how this develops. And, you know, I firmly believe that we need to prove ourselves. China most definitely need to prove themselves as a trustworthy partner when it comes to trade, so that our companies feel confident that they can operate in a market which actually provides the market shares that are there. And it shouldn't be an illusion. You will never reach the full market. That's just clear. And of course, Mats, you know that very well on the total truck market, for instance, how big share the Western companies have of that market. It's quite limited today. So we really need to see that strong movement from the Chinese. And I do believe that it's a
and
great...
some proof.
Yeah, and it might very much happen due to the fact that Chinese economy has been under very strong pressure during COVID. So now it's time for bounce back, and let us be part of that. But everyone has to be very clear of what they're doing.
Mats, I thought we would finish with some advice from you. You've spent so much time in China. You have this recent experience from establishing Scania's new production facilities. What are the most important lessons learned so far that you can communicate to our audience here in Visby?
Well, I think it's quite possible as a foreign actor to work together with the Chinese government and other stakeholders to bring about good change. We are working very actively with the Chinese government to improve the standards that regulate commercial vehicles, and we are bringing the Chinese regulators into global contexts. And so sometimes we have a feeling that China's too big to influence, but it's not.
So it's possible.
And I sometimes say to our friends, you need to spend more time on government relations, because that's a key strategy.
And Joachim, what's your specific advice to small and mid-sized tech companies? We're at Tech Arenan here in Visby, wanting to do business in China. What is absolutely key to understand?
I think the absolutely key is one, you need to be pretty close to the market. Things happen very fast here, and I think many back in Sweden lost the track during the pandemic because it was impossible to get in. So be close, be here, Don't just try to do a little bit of China with the left hand from Sweden, but also be humble and see, just like as mentioned before, there's a lot of technology out here. Before, we were very worried about bringing technology to China and getting it stolen or other things. But now there's a lot of new technology here that we don't have back home. So also be humble and explore what exists here. And then I think ultimately stay rather focused. China is still a huge market. And as a small, medium-sized company, we cannot just dip the toes here and there and boil the ocean. Then we risk getting a bit taken away in the wrong tangents. So have a very clear plan. And not too opportunistic. And then again, back to the State Secretary's advice in the beginning, there are a lot of risks in the market as well. And just like with any other market, if something sounds a bit too good to be true, then it is probably too good to be true. So let's not be naive when we do business here, just like we shouldn't be naive elsewhere. So being active, being close, but also being humble and listen, I think that's key advices.
Thank you. Great way to end this panel. I know these gentlemen love feedback. Hand up if this was relevant to you. Yes, so it's worth getting up in the morning, flying to visit.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mats Harborn and Joachim Abelin. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I'm keeping you on stage because we'll now go a bit further east, and we will focus on India. But I would like to start. I actually think you can take a 3-minute break, Håkan, because I would like to ask you, Nathan, if we could widen the scope and look at the whole Asia-Pacific region.
Yes.
It's the growth engine of the world, generating 50% of global growth. What fuels this growth, and what's the outlook for the wider region in the next 5 years, would you say?
It's a very, very interesting set of questions there. I think that very much for East Asia, the engine of growth has been and largely continues to be export driven. That these countries are absolutely export powerhouses, manufacturing powerhouses. As we saw during the pandemic, Asia is the workshop for the world. And when supply chain disruptions interceded and shipping costs soared, and we couldn't get the goods from Asia, it was a very adverse and disruptive thing for the global economy. But notably, the business model and development model that has been pursued in India is really quite different than in East Asia. And specifically in India, it has been much more a domestic demand-driven, internally driven kind of growth that contrasts dramatically with the very heavy export dependence that we've seen in East Asia. I would say that for India, the drivers, domestic demand, a large, very energetic, English-speaking, largely English-speaking population, and the capacities and the abilities that are slowly being unlocked in India. GDP per capita there is about a fifth of that of China, and China is about a fifth of that of the United States. So it's still a relatively poor country. But I think there's a lot of potential that we'll see in coming decades.
And in terms of competence, what is interesting?
I think that for India, we're really seeing them emerge potentially in the services sectors. And we've seen that over the last decade where their abilities, capacities, and skills provided a lot of support to manufacturing companies and other companies around the world in the services space in particular. But again, I would say that for India, they're trying to do something distinctly different, and that's kind of develop a balanced economy that is more or less self-sufficient. And we'll see it's a very different trajectory than we've seen for most other economies.
Let's talk more about India because we have prepared a panel on India as well. So stay here, Nathan. And now, Håkan, you can come back. Håkan Jervel. State Secretary to Minister of International Development, Cooperation and Foreign Trade. And with us from Serneke International, we have the Indian-Swedish entrepreneur Prashant Agarwal, President and CEO. Warm welcome. And we also have Cecilia Oskarsson, Trade and Investment Commissioner from Business Sweden for India. Welcome to our panel.
Hi. Come in.
May I start with you, Prashant? What are the greatest opportunities for doing business in India right now?
Thanks for the opportunity for being here. India is shining. That is what the global mantra has been, and indeed, India is shining. No wonder it's a country of 1.44 billion people today, the world's most populous state. And 1.44 billion people brings a dearth amount of opportunities. But having said that, India became a $1 trillion economy in 2007. And just in 15 years, it has grown 4x almost, becoming as close to 4 trillion now. From Sweden's perspective and India in general perspective, India has tremendous amount of opportunities in mid-tech, fintech, defense, healthcare, agriculture, basic utilities such as water, green energy, green infrastructure. These are some of the high focus agendas for India, which India is also driving to its maximum potential. And let's not forget that in Asia, the largest source of energy for whole of Asia, more than 50% has been coal for past 4-5 decades. And India has put on its focus on green energy and green transition. And these are some of the areas of extreme importance and very close to our hearts in Sweden as well. And last but not the least, India is also developing a lot of AI, and that's something which we all believe in from future perspective, and add a bit of entertainment aspect to it.
Yeah.
So this is what I would say in general. These are the large opportunities in India.
And tell us briefly, what kind of investments are you and Serneke doing in India?
Serneke International embarked on its journey with the second state visit happening from Sweden, with their excellencies traveling second time in India in 2019, where we took the decision to become and fill in the space of the global EPC void which was created. And hence we set up 3 offices in India today, in Bangalore, Hyderabad and Mumbai, and we have 40 plus resources. We are investing in not only the local market, but we are doing a lot of mapping from here in Sweden to go out and be a global EPC.
And Cecilia, what's the new attraction of India? Because we are talking a lot about India at current in Sweden.
Just to add to what Prashant just said, India has a lot of people. It's now the most populous nation on the earth. And of course, that also brings a lot of very well-educated people. Every year, more than 3 million STEM graduates from the Indian universities. So there are talent, there are very well-educated talent who also actually speak English. More so, we have a huge consumer base. Now the middle class of India is more of the size of EU, and are very interested in looking into new consumer goods of such. So I do believe that we also see a big inflow in Swedish and international consumer brands into India right now. I think that is extremely interesting and important to remember.
What would you say the main opportunities are for Swedish companies? Where should they focus?
Well, traditionally, it has been a lot of textile. We've had the stones and the gems. We've had some production. Today we see sourcing coming back to India again in huge way. Adding on to what Prashant earlier said, not only defense but also auto parts. Defense and retail, all the digital areas such as retail tech, fintech, edtech, medtech. You mentioned AI. There is a huge opportunities for the Swedish companies who are in that area, especially within medtech, because there are not 1,000 cases, but million of cases. That's very interesting and important to remember.
Håkan, India has already been part of the Swedish tech scene for a long time. And how can that position be further strengthened?
Well, I think it's extremely interesting to see that this development has taken place and is such a rapid pace now. The extremely ambitious rollout of 5G to 80% of the population in 2 years' time, that's just amazing, and that will really create more opportunities.
Better than Sweden.
You know, it's fascinating to see how decision making and yes, putting into place, and we are a bit slower in Europe, and that's you know, it really hurts us long term from our competitiveness. But you know, the opportunities are there, and we should cherish them. However, it's also clear that it has its challenges being moving into India, and therefore we have the brilliant minds of Cecilia and Pradesh here to move into getting the correct advice on how to enter the market. And it's states within China, India that really you know, have their own rules and regulations. But there's a very positive trajectory here, and we're extremely hopeful that we will see results coming out of the reopened negotiations between EU and India when it comes to free trade agreement. I think that is absolutely crucial. We will see how that develops. But one more thing that I should say, in Europe, we tend to see big parts of the outer world as something that has not risen to our standards in a sense. And I think that when we're talking about India and Asia, I've been based 7 years in Southeast Asia, it's very clear that you know, nobody's interested in having that point of view towards itself. We're talking about partnerships, of actually being really interacting together, because we have a lot to learn, even though sometimes we don't realize that, but we have a lot to learn, and really how to engage in strong partnership for the tech, for the green transition, which is massive now rolling out in India as well. So great opportunity.
With a huge local market that could also be a test market with the 5G rollout. Do you agree on this positive outlook?
I think that there are lots of reasons for optimism: the population, the capacity of the people, the skills, and the potential, which is, at least to some extent, being actualized. Over the last 9 years during the Modi term, the economy has grown at a 6% rate. And when I look at our global forecast for this year, we expect India to post the most rapid growth of any country in the world. But nevertheless, I would also say, and this draws on some of my experiences working at the US Treasury, that the cautions about some of the complexities of the business environment in India are very well taken. I mentioned before that it's made a lot of progress, but it's still a relatively poor country. But on some of the ESG in particular standards, there's still a lot of work to be done. And one place that I think that can manifest itself is that the business climate can be very complicated. And you mentioned kind of the multiplicity of jurisdictions that firms have to deal with, from the national to the local governments, and potentially conflicting expectations there are realities that I think many firms on the ground have to deal with. So lots of potential, absolutely. Lots of progress, absolutely. But I think it's important we keep our eyes open to some of the challenges as well, as has been emphasized.
Prashant, for those of you who have not done business in India, what are the main differences in the local business climate or culture compared to Sweden?
I would say that culturally we are a bit different, but there are a lot of elements which are quite similar to the Swedish mentality. And I emphasize a lot on the word samband. In India, business is done on samband, and that is a core DNA for Swedish people also. And if you're investing in India, especially on this samband aspect from a long-term perspective.
What do you mean samband?
Samband is more of a relationship, what you translate it into English. It's more of partnership, and it exactly has the same meaning in Swedish as well as in Indian language. So that's the beauty.
Close co-ties.
Absolutely,
Okay.
and that's very important. And from the perspective of like being locally present, being locally aware is very important. And being said that is what has given Ericsson 120 years in India, SKF 100 years in India, Volvo 25 plus years. And at some point in time, these companies were mid-sized companies, and today we all know what kind of global brands these are.
Mm-hmm. Cecilia, can you tell us more about some of the tech hotspots that might be interesting for Swedish companies? Because there are so many different regions here.
There are many different regions, and I think when you enter India, you have to remember that each stage is very different. You have to know where you enter and why into that specific state. So it's not about entering India, it's entering Gujarat or it's entering Maharashtra maybe. So of course there are different tech clusters. I think the government is talking about 8 different now, but let's focus on the 3 largest one. Of course, we need to mention Bengaluru or Bangalore, that it's more commonly known still. Bangalore is Silicon Valley of India, where we have, I think, 200 engineering universities, 400 global R&D centers. A lot of tech companies are setting up their center there. IBM, Google, we have Volvo, we also have Bosch, for instance, in that area. That continues, Bengaluru continues to be interesting and important. We also have Delhi today. Delhi is the national capital where all the government buildings are, but we also see startup scene entering into there, a lot in electronics, also manufacturing, so we cannot forget that. And then I also want to mention the Pune, Mumbai area, where Pune is where, of course, we have a lot of the old manufacturing, engineering Swedish companies based, but this is also Mumbai is the financial capital of India. That's also where the big conglomerates, the family-owned businesses are, like Tata, Reliance, etc.
And Prashant, you mentioned, or maybe it was you, Håkan, who said the AI development is really interesting. Where's that hub?
I would say it's Bangalore, and a lot is happening also these days in Pune and Mumbai. But Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Pune, Mumbai, these are the largest hubs. And it is also to do with the data. AI is based on data. And when you have a population of 1.44 billion people, then this data becomes very important and plays a crucial role in not only developing basic AI, but also the generative AI, which companies like Volvo and many others from Sweden, including Saab and others, are also focusing on.
Håkan, we've now mentioned the importance of local presence, but if you're not doing a direct investment, how can Swedish companies benefit from the high level of competence of the Indian IT group, programmers, etc.?
Well, you know, I think it's so interesting to see that young entrepreneurs, they're immediately global today. And if you have an issue, you try to solve it, and you go where you will be able to find a solution. And I would assume that many of the companies outside here that are sort of growing startups, when we talk about programming and so on, India is probably already in there. We should keep that in mind, that now that we move into the very, very rapidly increasing and developing part of digitalization and AI, this will happen regardless of what us politicians decide regarding free trade agreements and so on. So there are massive opportunities with this. And as you said, Prashant, is that the opportunity with so many people and collecting the data and really create something that is that really can contribute to our companies and development is massive. So be present and go there. And it's clear that We work very hard at the Foreign Ministry to set up our organization to be relevant. Business Sweden is doing so as well. But it's clear we're never enough in this regard of actually being present, and we would like to be so much more engaged.
Cecilia, India is also the market with the fastest growth of unicorns. What can a small Swedish tech company do? How can they spark interest and demand? What is your best advice?
Just let me come back to that they are now the tech scene. 2016, I think there were barely 500 startups in India. Today, 2022, last year, we had more than 75,000. So that's the growth that we see right now. So I think for the small Swedish, the start tech-ups, just to come in there and have the open mind, as we spoke about here before, about co-creation, be part of it, maybe join also the collaboration between the industry and the startup. There are also a lot of incentives from the government who wants to especially have help when it comes to the green transition. So lots of opportunities.
Finally, can we end with some concrete advice? If you had three pieces of advice for a company doing a direct investment in India, what would it be, Prashant?
If it has to be only three, then I will stick with the first alphabet of my name, that is P, and that is patience, persistence, and partnership, which translates to samband. These are the three most important things. In order to do business in India, you need to also be present in India, because just being out over here and not being there is not really going to benefit. So these are my three pieces of advice. And just what Cecilia added on the tech and the startup side from Sweden's perspective, there are a lot of Swedish startup companies which have as big as market share of 60% from the market share perspective. And one great unicorn example is Truecaller, where the largest market share comes from India.
Truecaller, yeah.
Just add
you can
one
add
thing.
some advice.
Yeah, no, but I think it's extremely interesting to see that India is actually providing very, very strong support to the green transition and the work being done here in Sweden now. We have more than 40,000 Indian, high-end people who are now present in Sweden, supporting us in the green transition. So the skills are coming from India to Sweden, and we should also tap into that to create the connections. So
that's a great way to create connections.
Yeah.
Go and get to know your friends in India.
Absolutely.
What's your most important piece of advice that you give at sort of the first meeting when you have potential clients to Business Sweden?
I would say empower the local management to give them the authority and to take decision, but also be able to communicate with the local audience. That's the first one. If I may say, the second one would then be to make sure you keep a long-term investment. You're there for a long-term, build relationship, not only with your clients and customer and suppliers, but also with the government. Government policies, etc., are very different from a national level to the state level. It's also very important that you're aware of the changes, because policies changes all the time.
Can you help us also with what to look out for, Nathan? What should we be careful about if we do a 5-year scenario?
That very much ties into kind of what my feelings were, is, you need to go into India with a long horizon. And I think over a 5, 10-year, 20-year period, investments in India and efforts to build these relationships are likely to be very beneficial and commercially rewarding. But it may take a number of years to truly reap those benefits. So the long-term planning, and my instinct is, and I don't have the same on-the-ground experience as you folks do, but be prepared for some surprises along the way. But the long-term commitment is going to win the day.
With my background in tech, I feel like I want to start right now. I got so engaged by this panel. Thank you so much for joining this morning. I'll ask the same question as to the China panel. Was this relevant to you? Hands up. Yes. So Thank you so much for taking your time, and thank you Business Sweden for this seminar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.